Senator King.
I think the folks in Rome might be onto something if they put us all in the same room with 500-year-old plumbing and say nobody leaves until you have a deal. We could solve this thing. I think Senator Johnson really hit it, and the discussion is really about the role and size of government. And I had an experience in Maine when I was governor. And by the way, Senator McConnell told me once that if you ask a governor who's now a senator if he enjoys being a senator more and he says yes, he will lie to you about other things. But I'm not finding that, actually. I was on a motorcycle riding a Harley and stopped at a general store in northern Maine, and as I walked through the door, the lady behind the counter saw me coming, knew who I was, and her first words when I walked through the door were, "Ha! The tax man." And I paid my bill and walked out, and everything was fine, but as I got at the door, she said, "Where are you going from here?" I said, "Down the road, to the south." She said, "Good. I hope you have a bumpy ride. Maybe you'll fix the roads." No sense of irony or paradox. She didn't want the taxes, but she wanted the road fixed. And we as a country are constantly wrestling with that phenomenon, both among ourselves and among our constituents. I think, I was going to take Senator Portman's chart. You're absolutely right. If you look at non-discretionary defense spending for the past 4 or 5 years and for the next 20 years, flat. Defense, flat. Federal healthcare expenditures goes from 4% of GDP to 12% of GDP. That's the issue. The problem is we can't just deal with it in terms of Medicare. We can't cut benefits and just say we're going to do this with Medicare. Medicare is paying the price that everybody else pays. We've got to deal with healthcare costs generally. And I realize that's not within the purview of this committee, or at least the debate we're having right now. But that's the big question that we have to talk about. That's why Senator Portman's chart goes up in those out years. It's all about health care spending. Now, on this issue of tax expenditures, in 1986, when Tip O'Neill and President Reagan made that famous deal, there was about $500 billion of deductions, exclusions, breaks in the tax code. Today, in constant dollars, that number is $1.2 trillion. In other words, it's doubled in real terms over the last 25 or 30 years. And the problem with these parts of the tax code is they never get reviewed once they're in there. Head Start has to be reauthorized every year and has to be funded every year out of the appropriations. Something that goes into the tax code, whether it's an exclusion, a deduction, or whatever it is there. It never gets reviewed. And that number has doubled. And what the proposal that you'll soon see says is take 7 or 8% of that 1.2 trillion over the next 10 years, and that's the revenue piece. And I think that's a reasonable number. That's not an extreme number. That's not going to cause anybody to close their business down. That's not going to cost us any jobs. But the real issue we have to talk about is what is the size? And we really ought to be talking about what's the right percentage of GDP. Is it 18, 18.5, which is what it's been historically, 19, 20? I would argue that it's got to be somewhere above where it's been historically simply because of the demographics. The number of people who are retiring, 10,000 people a day are becoming eligible for Medicare. 10,000 Americans a day are becoming eligible for Medicare. So that's just a reality that we have to cope with. Now, if we say we want it to be 17, 18%, then that means we're really having a fundamental debate about how our government serves its people. I think the proposal that's on the table now makes sense. I don't think it's, I'm not here to raise taxes. I think it is a sensible way to approach this thing. And to be truthful, in the overall context of all this, I don't think we're all that far apart. And as an independent sitting at this table, I don't think there are any bad guys or good guys at this table. I completely agree with you. We all have the same goal, which is a successful, prosperous America. The question is how we get there. And I think we've got the chairman has worked very hard to get us at a place where we have a solution that is in hand. And of course, we all know that whatever we do in the Senate isn't the last word. It's going to end up with some kind of negotiation with the House. And so that's going to be part of this. One final point. Governors every year go to New York and kiss the ring of the rating agencies in order to try to get yourself a low rating for your bonds, a good rating for your bonds. And I remember going to the rating agencies once and giving all these reasons about how Maine had low per capita debt, and we paid our debt off in 10 years, and how prudent we were and everything else. And I was in the middle of my little speech, and one of the rating guys looked at me and he said, "Governor, not fixing things is debt." And that was an insight for me, because not fixing things is a debt we're leaving to our children just as if it's dollars on the balance sheet. So when we're talking about infrastructure investment, if we don't do that, that's debt as well. So I think we've got a very straight-faced, defensible plan. I realize our colleagues on the other side view it differently, but I think I agree with Senator Johnson. We need to focus on where we can agree. I think there's a substantial amount of agreement. We ought to talk about what's the target, 1.8 trillion, 1.9 to 1.5, in addition to what's already been done. And if you add up what's already been done, it's $2 of cuts for every dollar of additional revenues. That's about where Simpson-Bowles was. I asked Erskine Bowles why it wasn't Bowles-Simpson. He said he was afraid if it was that the initials would put people off here in Washington. Anyway, I think we ought to be able to find our way. And I don't know what's so odd about this. I've only been here a few weeks, but here we are already doing budgets. I'm feeling pretty good about that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.